Hello everyone, Taki here. I have to say that this is probably the most excited that I've been to film a video in a very long time. Today we're going to take a look at probably the biggest thing that's happened in the emulation scene in years. We finally have a Nintendo Switch emulator for Android. Before we take a look at the X2 and the Nintendo Switch emulator, I have to do a huge disclaimer for the folks over at Nintendo. All of the games that I'm running in this showcase are ones that I own and that I've personally dumped with my own Switch. This video is purely for educational purposes only. Let's get the first thing out of the way. In order to use this emulator, you are going to need a very powerful Snapdragon phone. I picked up the phone in this video just to make this video. This emulator requires a Snapdragon 855 or better to run. I've tested other Snapdragons, including an 845, and they all do not work. The phone that I'm using in this video is a Realme X50 Pro 5G with a Snapdragon 865 processor. This is the Egg-NS emulator that you'll need in order to play Switch backups. You need to create a login before you can use the emulator, and it does authenticate itself each time when you want to boot a game. If you try to launch one of these games without the controller, it will not work. After you plug the controller into your phone, the emulator will recognize the device and allow you to launch a game. Now I wanted to show you, if you launch a game without any internet, you will be stuck at this boot screen. This took me a while to figure out, so I will have to work around this in the filming of this video. I'm going to endeavor to show you that this thing is fully legit one time, and I'll cut around this process later in the video. First, I'm going to boot up a game until I get past that boot screen, and then I'm going to disable Wi-Fi, which is equivalent to enabling airplane mode since I don't have a SIM in this phone. This is going to be one full video with no cuts until the game crashes out. Pokemon Sword used to be notorious for crashing during cutscenes, but in open areas like this, the emulator shouldn't have a problem. You can see that the speed is fairly decent and the FPS is listed on the left-hand corner of the screen. Depending on what you're doing in the game, the FPS will drop, but it's definitely manageable. Now I'm going to get into a battle to show you what that's like. You can see that it's pretty smooth in battles with some light effects going out. FPS is between 20 to 30. Now I'm going to get into another battle, and this time I want to use a bigger attack. Just to show you, I still don't have any data connection at all on this phone. Now you can see the FPS is taking a big hit and the game will just outright crash, and this happens a lot on this game. Let's boot the game up again, and this time I'm going to ride my bike around just so you can see the performance of moving around this big map. In this battle, the sound is going to cut out, and it usually can come back, but then the game just completely crashes. Now let's take a look at Super Mario Odyssey. I've actually seen this game running on a video on Bilibili, but I've had no luck and I've tried to run this hundreds of times. You can rotate the camera around in this early area, and you can see that the performance is pretty good, but the moment that you turn the camera around all the way, the game will just crash. Link's Awakening is actually really stable, but the FPS isn't good when you are in the overworld. There are some light graphical glitches here and there, like the chomps not showing up, but the FPS inside houses is pretty good. I also want to take a look at how bad combat is at this FPS. It's not too bad, all things considered, but we probably have a long way to go to make this more fluid. Dungeons and underground areas are much better than the overworld. And just one more combat sequence before we move on. Now let's take a look at Let's Go Pikachu. FPS is obviously really solid indoors, but you can see some slight stuttering and issues with joystick calibration. The FPS is also really good in battles and when you are catching Pokemon. I'd say that the performance of this 865 with this emulator is somewhere between the Win 2 and the Win Max. The final game that I have from the compatibility list is Hollow Knight. There are actually a lot of games that are listed as running perfectly with this emulator, but I don't own them. And I'm not in a rush to go out and buy them just yet, but Hollow Knight does run very well. I also want to show that if you disconnect the controller and reconnect it, you cannot continue to use the emulator, so you'll have to reboot the entire game in order to play again. I'll talk more about the controller when I review it, but I do want to point out that it's designed to have an airflow gap under the device, but it doesn't really work well with a phone this big, and I haven't really seen a telescoping controller that does. Barring the D-pad, which is going to get some hate out there, the controls on this controller are really good and easily some of the best that I've seen from GameSir. My only gripe is that there are no analog shoulder buttons on this device, but the back is amazing. The contour on this back grip is really good. The only controller that I use that matches this comfort is a Clamp-On by FlyDigi, but that's only really useful for some MOBA games. Anyway, I plan on taking a deeper look at this controller to see how it functions in other settings. As of right now, I'm very impressed with the performance of the emulator and the performance of the controller itself. If you want to pick up one of these devices for yourself, you can find a link to the device and a 10% off coupon. Just be aware that you do need a Snapdragon 855 or better to use the Nintendo Switch emulator at this point. I'll catch you next time with another review. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.